This is your clean finished and your serpentine stitch sample. The clean finish sample and the serpentine stitch sample will actually be done on the same piece of fabric. You'll be given a piece of fabric. You will sew the seam at 5/8 of an inch, back stitching at both ends, and then press the seam flat as it was sewn, press the seam open, and then you are ready to begin preparing for your seam finish. For the clean finish seam, you are going to turn one side of your seam allowance under 1/4 of an inch and press that under 1/4 of an inch, which means that you should have 3/8 of an inch left along that seam allowance. And as the TA is grading your seam finish, that's what they're going to check for, is do you have 3/8 of an inch left there. So as soon as you've got an even smooth 3/8 of an inch, which you should have if you sewed straight, you should be able to turn it under 1/4, have 3/8 left. Then the serpentine does not need anything done to it until you go to the sewing machine. And when those are pressed and ready, then you are ready to go to the sewing machine and stitch those two seam finishes. The first one I'm going to stitch is the clean finished edge. You can use your number 5 foot if that helps you. I am just going to use the regular foot and edge stitch down this side. So I'm going to drop that needle. And then just edge stitch down along that folded edge. And you want to be about a 1/16 of an inch away from the folded edge as you stitch. And then when you're through, you'll just have this row of stitching that holds that in place. That completes your clean finished edge. In order to do the serpentine stitch, you are going to push 17, push the 1 and the 7 on your machine with quick succession, and we'll come to stitch 17. And then as this sews, it's going to sew in stitches, and then turn and stitch back, heading across. And so it looks kind of like a zigzag, but it sews along as it is going. So as you watch the machine, you can see that it's sewing back and forth and back and forth. Okay. A place that you can use for a guide as you're sewing, if you align the fabric up along that inside toe of the presser foot, and you'll notice that I hold the tail of the fabric, or the tail of the thread behind the fabric, gives me something to put just a little bit of pressure. And if I hold my hands again in front and behind, applies a little bit of pressure, being very careful. I am not pushing or pulling this fabric through the machine. I'm letting the feed dogs feed it through. I'm just helping by holding it in front, holding the seam flat, and making sure that the edge of my seam allowance runs right along that inside of the toe of the presser foot. And you head towards that edge. Okay, so the two seam finishes are completed. The turn and stitch seam finish reduces fraying because that raw edge is now protected between the seam allowance and the garment, and so it does not get the wear and tear or the rub along that raw edge. And then you have also stitched along that folded edge, which will not fray and protects your seam from fraying out. Excellent seam finish for biased edges or for slightly curved edges. A turn and stitched seam finish is the very best for a slight bias or for a curved edge. Your serpentine stitch, if you look, it's very similar. It looks almost like the zigzag stitch that you did in the beginning, but instead of just going back and forth as it's sewed, it actually sews across, catching all the threads as you come across that. And so it works somewhat like a serged edge. It's the closest thing that a regular sewing machine has to serging to completely enclose or encase those threads and not allow them to fray out. And it does that because not only is the outside thread caught, but it's caught again every single stitch coming across and back, and so it's very effective in cutting back the amount of fray that will happen. And so that's how those two seams work, and that takes care of them.